The hospital corridor was eerily quiet at 11:47 p.m. when Stella Foster realized she was completely alone. Her phone buzzed with yet another excuse, this time from her brother Marcus. "Sorry, I can't make it. Got stuck at work." The same brother who never missed a single football game, but somehow couldn't show up for her emergency surgery. Her hands trembled as she stared at the pre-op paperwork, wondering how her own family could abandon her at the most terrifying moment of her life. But what happened next in that operating room would change everything she thought she knew about family, loyalty, and the people we choose to call our own. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The fluorescent lights above buzzed with that annoying electrical hum that only hospitals seem to master. Stella Foster sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her fingers nervously picking at the hospital bracelet around her wrist. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial had that distinct smell of antiseptic mixed with fear, a combination she'd hoped never to experience alone. Her phone screen showed 11:52 p.m., and the missed calls were piling up, not from people checking on her, but from her own attempts to reach someone, anyone, who might care enough to sit with her through this nightmare. The appendicitis had hit like a freight train during her shift at the downtown marketing firm where she worked as a graphic designer. One moment, she was perfecting a client presentation. The next, she was doubled over in agony, her coworker Janet calling 911 while Stella writhed on the break room floor. "Emergency surgery," the attending physician had explained with clinical detachment. "Your appendix is close to rupturing. We need to get you into the OR within the hour." That was 3 hours ago. Stella had immediately called her mother, Patricia Foster, expecting at least some maternal concern. Instead, she got voicemail, then another voicemail. Finally, a text that made her stomach clench worse than the appendicitis. "Honey, I'm in the middle of my book club's wine night. Can this wait until tomorrow? I'm sure you're fine." Her younger brother Marcus had been next on the list. Surely he'd drop everything to be there for his sister. They'd grown up thick as thieves in their cramped apartment in Riverside, Illinois, sharing everything from Halloween candy to childhood secrets. But Marcus was apparently pulling a double shift at the warehouse and couldn't possibly leave. Never mind that he'd called in sick just last week to attend a Cubs game with his buddies. Her sister Rachel lived closest, just 20 minutes away in Lincoln Park. Rachel was the family golden child, the successful real estate agent with the perfect husband and 2 perfect kids. But Rachel was hosting a dinner party for her husband's business associates and couldn't possibly excuse herself. "You understand, right, Stella? This could really help David's career. I'm sure the hospital staff will take good care of you." Even her father, who lived alone since the divorce and usually jumped at any chance to feel needed by his children, had declined. He was apparently in the middle of a poker game with his retirement community friends and was on a winning streak he couldn't walk away from. As Stella sat there, watching other patients with their worried families huddled around them, she felt a profound loneliness settle in her chest. A woman about her age was being comforted by what looked like her entire extended family: parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, even a few kids running around despite the late hour. An elderly man had his devoted wife of 50 years holding his hand while their adult children took turns reassuring him that his hip surgery would go smoothly. And then there was Stella Foster, 28 years old, completely alone in a hospital at midnight, facing surgery with nothing but her own racing thoughts for company. She pulled up her contacts list one more time, scrolling through names of friends, coworkers, anyone who might be willing to show up. Her college roommate, Sarah, lives in California now. Her work friend, Janet, had already done enough by calling the ambulance. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was 83 and probably asleep. There was literally no one. A nurse with kind eyes and graying hair approached her clipboard in hand. Her name tag read Margaret Sinclair, RN. "Miss Foster, I'm Margaret. I'll be your pre-op nurse tonight. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Stella admitted, surprised by her own honesty. Margaret's expression softened. "I noticed you've been sitting here alone for quite a while. Is there anyone we should call? Any family members on their way? Stella felt heat rise in her cheeks. The shame of being abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love her unconditionally was almost worse than the physical pain. No, there's no one coming. Margaret sat down in the chair beside her, something that seemed to go against every hospital efficiency protocol Stella had ever witnessed. Sometimes the families we're born into aren't the families that show up for us, she said quietly. But that doesn't mean you're going through this alone. We're going to take excellent care of you tonight. Those words brought unexpected tears to Stella's eyes. Here was a complete stranger showing her more compassion than her own blood relatives had managed to muster. The surgeon will want to meet with you before we head to the OR, Margaret continued. Dr. Chen is one of the best we have. She's young but incredibly skilled. You're in excellent hands. Stella nodded, trying to focus on the reassurance rather than the fear gnawing at her insides. She'd never had surgery before, never been put under general anesthesia, never been this vulnerable and alone. Margaret helped her into the hospital gown and booties, explaining each step of the pre-op process with patient detail. She started an IV with gentle precision and reviewed Stella's medical history with the kind of thorough attention that made Stella feel like she actually mattered to someone tonight. "Any allergies to medications?" Margaret asked. "Not that I know of." "Any previous surgeries?" "No, this is my first." "Any family history of complications with anesthesia?" Stella paused at that question. It struck her as ironic. Here she was, needing family medical history, and not a single family member had bothered to show up to provide it. "I don't really know," she admitted. We're not very close." Margaret made a note on her chart, but didn't press the issue. "That's okay, we'll monitor you closely." As they waited for the OR to be ready, Margaret stayed with her, making small talk about everything except family. She asked about Stella's work, her hobbies, and her apartment. It was the kind of casual conversation that might happen between friends, and it helped distract from both the physical pain and the emotional ache of abandonment. "I wanted to be a graphic designer when I was younger," Margaret confided. "I was always drawing, always creating something. But life took me in a different direction, and I ended up in nursing. Can't say I regret it, though. I get to help people through some of their scariest moments." "Like tonight," Stella said gratefully. "Like tonight." A younger nurse appeared at the doorway. "Margaret, we're ready for Miss Foster in OR3. Stella's heart began racing again. This was it, the moment of truth. Going into surgery completely alone, trusting her life to strangers, while her own family couldn't be bothered to interrupt their social activities. Margaret squeezed her hand as they began wheeling her toward the operating room. "Remember what I said about families that show up for us? Tonight, we're your family. Every single person in that OR is going to fight for you like you're our own daughter, sister, mother. You're not alone in this." As they moved through the sterile corridors toward the surgical suite, Stella closed her eyes and tried to hold on to that promise. Maybe blood wasn't always thicker than water. Maybe sometimes the people who truly cared about you were the ones who chose to be there, not the ones who were obligated by genetics to show up but failed to do so anyway. The OR doors swung open, and Stella Foster rolled toward her surgery, surrounded by medical professionals who were treating her with more love and care than her own family had shown her in years. The operating room was a symphony of controlled chaos. Bright white lights illuminated every corner, casting sharp shadows across the gleaming steel instruments arranged with military precision. Stella found herself staring up at a ceiling tile with a small water stain that looked remarkably like a butterfly, an oddly comforting detail in this sterile environment. "Good evening, Miss Foster." A voice came from her left, and Stella turned to see a woman in surgical scrubs approaching. She was younger than Stella had expected, probably in her early 30s, with intelligent dark eyes above her mask. "I'm Dr. Amanda Chen, your surgeon tonight." Something about the surgeon's presence was immediately reassuring. Despite her youth, she moved with the confident precision of someone who had done this procedure countless times. Her hands, as she reviewed Stella's chart, were steady and sure.
I know this is frightening, Dr. Chen continued, pulling up a small stool beside the operating table, especially when you're going through it alone. Margaret told me about your situation, and I want you to know that we're going to take exceptional care of you. The anesthesiologist introduced himself as Dr. Robert Hawkins, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a gentle bedside manner that immediately put Stella at ease. I'm going to give you something to help you relax first, he explained, adjusting something on the IV line. You'll feel drowsy, and then we'll administer general anesthesia. When you wake up, this will all be behind you. As the pre-medication began to take effect, Stella felt the sharp edges of her anxiety begin to soften. The bustling activity around her, nurses prepping instruments, monitors beeping steadily, hushed professional conversations, created a cocoon of competent care that her family had never provided. Dr. Chen, Stella managed to say, her words slightly slurred from the medication, thank you for being here, for caring about someone you don't even know.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The surgeon's eyes crinkled in what was clearly a smile beneath her mask. You'd be surprised how much we care about every single person who comes through these doors. Sleep well, Stella. We'll see you on the other side. The last thing Stella remembered was the gentle pressure of the anesthesia mask and Dr. Chen's reassuring voice counting backward from 10. 3 hours later, Stella drifted back to consciousness in the recovery room, her mind foggy but her body free from the sharp pain that had brought her here. A different nurse, this one younger, with bright red hair, was checking her vital signs. "Welcome back," the nurse said cheerfully. "I'm Jessica Walsh. Your surgery went perfectly. Dr. Chen removed your appendix laparoscopically, so you'll have minimal scarring and a much faster recovery time." Stella tried to speak but found her throat dry and scratchy. Jessica immediately offered her ice chips, which felt like heaven against her parched mouth. "How long was I out?" Stella croaked. "About 4 hours total. It's just after 4 a.m. now. Your surgery was actually quicker than expected. Dr. Chen said your appendix was inflamed but hadn't ruptured, which is great news. You caught it just in time." As the anesthesia fog continued to clear, reality began seeping back in. Her phone, sitting on the bedside table, showed no new messages, no missed calls from worried family members, no frantic texts asking about her condition. Even now, hours after emergency surgery, her own blood relatives couldn't be bothered to check if she was alive. "Is there anyone you'd like us to call?" Jessica asked gently, clearly noticing Stella's expression as she stared at her silent phone. "No," Stella said quietly. "There's no one." Jessica's face showed a flicker of sympathy, but she quickly shifted into professional mode. "Well, the good news is you're going to be just fine. Dr. Chen will want to see you before you're discharged, probably sometime this afternoon. You'll need to take it easy for a few weeks, but you should make a full recovery." As Jessica continued with post-op instructions, Stella found herself thinking about the contrast between the care she'd received here and the indifference from her family. These medical professionals, complete strangers, had treated her with more genuine concern and compassion than the people who had known her for 28 years. Her mother, Patricia, would probably call eventually, probably with some excuse about why she couldn't visit during recovery. Marcus would send a text asking if she was all better now, as if appendix surgery was as minor as getting a flu shot. Rachel would offer to send flowers, but would ultimately forget, and their father would promise to visit, but would find reasons to postpone until Stella was fully recovered and no longer needed support. Dr. Chen appeared in the recovery room around 6 a.m., now dressed in regular hospital scrubs instead of surgical gear. Without the mask, Stella could see that she was even younger than she'd thought, with a kind face and the sort of genuine smile that reached her eyes. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Chen asked, pulling up a chair beside Stella's bed. "Much better. The pain is completely gone." "Excellent. The procedure went exactly as planned. Your appendix was definitely inflamed and would have ruptured within hours if we hadn't removed it. You made the right call coming in when you did."
Dr. Chen reviewed the post-surgical care instructions with meticulous attention to detail. No heavy lifting for 6 weeks, gradually increasing activity levels, warning signs to watch for, follow-up appointment scheduling. It was the kind of thorough, caring attention to detail that Stella wished she could have received from her family during any crisis in her life. Do you have someone who can stay with you for the first few days? Dr. Chen asked. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's recommended, especially for the first 48 hours. Stella hesitated. The honest answer was no. She'd be going home to her empty one-bedroom apartment in Wicker to recover alone. But admitting that felt too pathetic, even to this compassionate stranger. I'll be fine on my own, she said finally. Dr. Chen studied her face for a moment. You know, when I was in medical school, I had to have my wisdom teeth removed. All 4 of them, surgical extraction. My parents lived across the country, and I didn't have many close friends yet. I thought I'd tough it out alone too. What happened? I ended up getting a dry socket, a painful complication, and had no one to drive me back to the oral surgeon, no one to pick up my prescription, no one to make sure I was eating and staying hydrated. It was miserable and completely unnecessary. Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. Sometimes, accepting help isn't about weakness. It's about being smart enough to recognize when you need support. The words hit Stella harder than expected. Here was someone who understood exactly what it felt like to face a medical crisis without family support.
I have a neighbor, Stella found herself saying. Mrs. Chen, no relation. She's elderly but very sweet. Maybe I could ask her to check on me. That sounds like a good plan. And don't hesitate to call if you have any concerns at all. We're here 24/7. As Dr. Chen prepared to leave, she paused at the doorway. Stella, the family we're born into isn't always the family that matters most. Sometimes, the people who show up for us are the ones who choose to care, not the ones who are supposed to care. Those words echoed Margaret's earlier sentiment, and Stella felt a strange sense of belonging despite being in a hospital recovery room at dawn, completely alone. These medical professionals had created a temporary family around her, providing the support and compassion her actual relatives had failed to offer. After Dr. Chen left, Stella lay in the quiet recovery room watching the sunrise through the small window. Chicago was waking up. Early commuters heading to work, joggers starting their morning runs, the city beginning another day. Life was continuing normally for everyone else while she processed this profound realization about family, loyalty, and what it truly meant to care for someone. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Marcus. Hey sis, how'd the thing go? All good? The thing. Her emergency surgery, her moment of greatest vulnerability, reduced to the thing in a casual text message sent 18 hours after the fact. Stella stared at the message for a long moment, then set the phone aside without responding. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't scrambling to make excuses for her family's behavior or trying to convince herself that their indifference was somehow normal. The morning shift change brought new faces, but the same level of professional care and genuine concern. Each nurse, each technician, each person who entered her room treated her as if her well-being actually mattered to them. It was a stark contrast to the people who shared her DNA but couldn't share their time or emotional support. As Stella prepared for discharge later that morning, she realized something fundamental had shifted. This experience had shown her what real care looked like, and it wasn't coming from the people she'd expected it from her entire life. Stella's discharge from Northwestern Memorial happened just after noon on a surprisingly warm Tuesday in October. The crisp autumn air felt like freedom after the recycled hospital atmosphere, but as she stood on the sidewalk waiting for her Uber, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She was heading home to an empty apartment with no one checking on her, no one bringing her soup, no one making sure she followed her recovery instructions properly. The ride to her Wicker Park apartment was quiet. The driver, a middle-aged man named Carlos, noticed her careful movements as she settled into the backseat. "Hospital?" he asked kindly. "Surgery," Stella replied simply. "You take care of yourself, okay? Rest is important for healing." Even this stranger showed more concern than her own family had managed. It was becoming a pattern that both comforted and depressed her.
Her apartment building was a converted warehouse from the 1920s, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures that looked charming in real estate photos, but felt cold and impersonal when you were recovering from surgery alone. Stella climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, grateful that Dr. Chen had used the laparoscopic approach that made movement less painful. Inside her one-bedroom unit, everything was exactly as she'd left it the previous morning when she'd rushed off to work, completely unaware that her day would end in an operating room. Her laptop was still open on the kitchen counter, displaying the client presentation she'd never finished. Her coffee mug sat in the sink, a ring of dried coffee staining the bottom. Her bed was unmade, sheets twisted from a restless night's sleep that felt like it had happened weeks ago instead of just over 24 hours earlier. The silence was deafening. Stella made her way to the couch and carefully lowered herself down, then reached for her phone to send a text to her supervisor, explaining her absence and requesting time off for recovery. As she typed, her phone rang with an unknown number. "Miss Foster, this is Jennifer Rodriguez from Northwestern Memorial's Patient Services. I'm calling to check on how you're settling in at home." The call caught Stella completely off guard. She'd never heard of a hospital following up so quickly after discharge. I'm fine, thank you. Just got home, actually." "Wonderful. I have a note here that you might be recovering without assistance. Is that correct?" Stella hesitated. She'd managed to downplay the situation at the hospital, but something about Jennifer's tone made her want to be honest. "Yes, that's right. It's just me."
I see. Well, I wanted to let you know that we have a volunteer program for patients in your situation. We have trained volunteers who can check in on post-surgical patients, help with grocery shopping, provide transportation to follow-up appointments, that sort of thing. Would you be interested in learning more about it? The offer was so unexpected and thoughtful that Stella found herself tearing up. Yes, actually, that would be really helpful. Excellent. I'm going to connect you with one of our coordinators, and they'll match you with someone in your area. In the meantime, please don't hesitate to call if you need anything at all. We want to make sure your recovery goes smoothly. After hanging up, Stella stared at her phone in amazement. A hospital volunteer program for patients without family support? It was like they'd anticipated exactly her situation and had resources in place to help. Meanwhile, her own brother lived 20 minutes away and couldn't even manage a proper phone call to check on her. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Hope everything went well, sweetie. Talk soon. Pla." The casual tone, complete with a heart emoji, made Stella's blood pressure spike. Patricia Foster was texting like she'd missed a casual lunch date, not her daughter's emergency surgery. There was no acknowledgement of abandoning her, no apology for missing one of the most frightening experiences of Stella's life, no actual inquiry about how she was feeling or what she needed. Another text came through, this one from Rachel. "Heard you had some kind of procedure? Hope it wasn't too serious. Let me know if you need anything." The performative nature of the offer grated on Stella's nerves. Rachel lived closest to the hospital and could have easily stopped by during her extensive real estate showings around the city. But the offer to help came only now, when Stella was already home and the crisis had passed. Stella set her phone on silent and tried to focus on following Dr. Chen's recovery instructions. She took her prescribed antibiotics, drank plenty of water, and attempted to eat something light despite having no appetite. The physical aspects of recovery were straightforward enough, but the emotional aftermath was proving more complicated. She found herself thinking about Dr. Chen's words about chosen family, and about Margaret's observation that the families we're born into aren't always the ones that show up for us. For the first time in her adult life, Stella was seriously questioning whether her relationship with her biological family was healthy or worth maintaining. Around 3 p.m., there was a gentle knock on her door. Stella carefully made her way over and looked through the peephole to see Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor from the apartment across the hall. She was holding a covered dish and looked genuinely concerned. "Stella, dear, I heard you might have had some medical trouble." Mrs. Chen's voice carried the slight accent of someone who had immigrated from Taiwan decades earlier, but had never quite lost the musical quality of her native language. Stella opened the door, suddenly grateful for human contact that wasn't mediated by a phone screen.
I had my appendix removed yesterday, she explained. Emergency surgery. Mrs. Chen's expression immediately shifted to one of maternal concern. Oh my goodness, and you're home alone already? Where is your family? The direct question, asked with such genuine care, almost broke Stella's composure entirely. They were busy. They couldn't make it to the hospital. Mrs. Chen studied her face for a moment, and Stella could see the older woman processing the implications of that statement. Without another word, Mrs. Chen stepped into the apartment and set the covered dish on Stella's kitchen counter. I made too much chicken congee, she said matter-of-factly, though they both knew this was a kind of fiction. It's perfect for recovery, easy to digest, lots of nutrients, and I insist you let me know if you need anything at all. Grocery shopping, pharmacy runs, anything. The simple kindness of the gesture hit Stella harder than she expected. Here was someone who barely knew her, offering more practical support than her entire biological family combined. Mrs. Chen, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. When my Harold was sick, before he passed, we had wonderful neighbors who helped us. This is what people do for each other. This is what family does. That word, family, hung in the air between them. Mrs. Chen had just illustrated exactly what her actual relatives had failed to grasp, that caring for someone means showing up when they need you, not when it's convenient for you. They sat together for a while, Mrs. Chen telling stories about her late husband and their early years in Chicago, while Stella sipped the warming congee. It was the first time since the whole ordeal began that Stella felt truly cared for by someone who wasn't being paid to provide medical services. After Mrs. Chen left, Stella's phone rang again. This time it was the volunteer coordinator from Northwestern Memorial, a cheerful woman named Lisa, who explained the program in detail. We typically match patients with volunteers based on location and availability. I actually have someone in your neighborhood who's available starting tomorrow. Her name is Sarah Mitchell. She's a retired teacher who lives about 6 blocks from you. She's been volunteering with us for 3 years and has excellent references. What exactly would she help with?
Whatever you need, within reason. Grocery shopping, picking up prescriptions, driving to follow-up appointments, just checking in to make sure you're okay. Some of our patients just appreciate having someone to talk to during recovery. Stella found herself agreeing to meet Sarah the next day. As she hung up, she realized that in less than 24 hours, she'd received more genuine support from strangers and casual acquaintances than from the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. Her phone showed 17 missed calls now, but none from her family members. They were all from work colleagues, her landlord checking about rent that was due next week, and a few robocalls. The silence from her relatives was deafening in its consistency. That evening, as Stella prepared for bed in her quiet apartment, she made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. She was done making excuses for people who couldn't be bothered to show up for her when it mattered most. She was done pretending that their indifference was somehow normal or acceptable. The people who had shown up, Dr. Chen, Margaret, Jessica, Mrs. Chen, even Carlos the Uber driver, had demonstrated what real care looked like. It wasn't complicated or demanding, it was simply being present when someone needed you. As she drifted off to sleep, Stella felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace with the idea of letting go of relationships that had never truly served her, and openness to the possibility that real family might be found in the most unexpected places. The next morning brought Sarah Mitchell to Stella's door at exactly 10 a.m., just as promised. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of warm smile that immediately put people at ease. She carried a small tote bag and moved with the efficient energy of someone who had spent decades managing classrooms full of children. "You must be Stella," Sarah said, extending her hand. "I brought some herbal tea that's supposed to be good for post-surgical recovery. My daughter swears by it, though I think half the benefit is just having someone make you a cup of tea when you're not feeling well." Within minutes, Sarah had assessed Stella's apartment with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to identifying needs before they were voiced. She noted the empty refrigerator, the pile of mail that had accumulated, the way Stella moved carefully to avoid straining her incisions. First things first, Sarah announced, pulling a small notebook from her tote bag. Let's make a grocery list. What do you actually like to eat when you're feeling under the weather? It was such a simple question, but it revealed something that Stella's family had never bothered to learn about her. They knew her birthday, her job title, her address, but none of them had ever asked what foods brought her comfort or what she needed when she was sick. As they worked on the list together, Sarah shared stories about her years teaching 5th grade at Lincoln Elementary, her 2 grown daughters who lived in Portland and Denver, and her late husband who had been a firefighter for 32 years. Tom always said that the best way to know someone's character is to watch how they treat people when there's nothing to gain from it, Sarah mused while writing down ginger ale and saltine crackers on the shopping list. He volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend for 15 years, even after he retired. Never wanted recognition for it, just loved helping creatures who couldn't help themselves. The parallel to Stella's situation wasn't lost on either of them. While Sarah went to the grocery store, Stella decided to tackle the pile of mail and messages that had accumulated. Among the bills and promotional flyers, she found a Get Well card that had been slipped under her door. It was from Janet, her coworker who had called the ambulance, with a handwritten note. "Hope you're recovering well. Don't worry about the Morrison presentation. I finished it and the client loved it. Take all the time you need to get better. The office isn't the same without your terrible coffee jokes." The thoughtfulness of Janet completing her work project without being asked, combined with the personal touch of the handwritten note, stood in sharp contrast to her family's generic text messages. Janet had known her for less than 2 years, yet had shown more practical consideration than people who had known her since birth. Sarah returned from shopping with enough food to sustain Stella through her entire recovery period. She'd also picked up Stella's prescriptions, replaced the burnt-out light bulb in her kitchen fixture, and somehow managed to remember to buy the specific brand of yogurt Stella had mentioned preferring. "Now," Sarah said, efficiently putting away groceries, "I want you to promise me something. If you start feeling worse, if you have any concerning symptoms, or if you just feel overwhelmed, you call me immediately. Day or night, I don't care. I've raised 2 daughters and taught hundreds of children. I'm not easily rattled, and I'm not going anywhere." The unconditional nature of the offer brought tears to Stella's eyes. This woman, who had known her for exactly 2 hours, was providing the kind of unwavering support that Stella had never received from her own mother. "Why?" Stella found herself asking. "Why are you doing all this for someone you don't even know?" Sarah paused in her grocery organizing and looked at Stella with genuine surprise. "Honey, what kind of question is that? You needed help, I was available to help, so I helped. That's just what people do." But that wasn't what people did, at least not in Stella's experience. People made excuses. People prioritized their own convenience. People offered help they never intended to follow through on. Yet here was Sarah, treating genuine care and support as if it were the most natural thing in the world. After Sarah left, Stella found herself thinking about the stark difference between her volunteer's attitude and her family's responses to the crisis. Sarah saw a need and filled it without being asked, without expecting gratitude, without making it about herself. Meanwhile, Stella's relatives had treated her emergency surgery like an inconvenience to their social schedules. Her phone rang around 3 p.m. The caller ID showed her father's number, and Stella hesitated before answering. This was the first actual phone call she'd received from any family member since the surgery. "Stella, how are you feeling, sweetheart?" Her father's voice carried the forced cheerfulness he used when he was trying to smooth over something he felt guilty about. "I'm recovering, Dad. Still sore, but getting better." "That's wonderful to hear. I'm so sorry I couldn't make it to the hospital the other night. You know how these poker games go. The guys really count on me being there, and I hate to let them down." The casual way he equated her emergency surgery with disappointing his retirement community poker buddies was breathtaking in its selfishness. "Dad, I had major surgery. I was terrified and completely alone." "Oh, I'm sure you were fine. You've always been the tough one in the family. Besides, you had all those doctors and nurses taking care of you, right? Probably better care than any of us could have given you anyway."
The logic was so twisted that Stella found herself speechless. He was simultaneously minimizing her fear and pain while congratulating himself for abandoning her because medical professionals could provide better care than family support. Actually, Dad, the nurses asked several times if the family was coming. They seemed surprised that I was there alone. Well, these things happen, sweetheart. The important thing is that you're okay now. Listen, I was thinking I might stop by this weekend if I don't have other plans. Would that work for you? The conditional nature of his visit offer, if I don't have other plans, perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with her family dynamic. She was recovering from surgery, and her father was treating a visit like a casual social call that might get canceled if something more interesting came up. Don't worry about it, Dad. I have help. Oh, good. I knew your mother or one of your siblings would step up eventually. No, Dad. I have help from people who actually showed up when I needed them. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Stella, you sound upset. You know we all love you, right? Family is family. That phrase, family is family, had been used to excuse bad behavior her entire life. It was the family motto that justified selfishness, neglect, and broken promises. But Stella was beginning to understand that real family wasn't about sharing DNA, it was about sharing care and commitment. Dad, I have to go. I'm tired and need to rest. Of course, sweetheart. Take care of yourself. Love you. After hanging up, Stella sat in the quiet of her apartment processing the conversation. Her father had managed to call her sweetheart multiple times while simultaneously making it clear that his poker game was more important than her surgical recovery. He'd expressed love while offering only conditional, convenient support. The contrast with Sarah's unconditional availability was stark. Sarah barely knew Stella, but had committed to being there day or night without hesitation. Her father had known her for 28 years, but couldn't commit to a weekend visit without caveats about other plans. Around 5 p.m., Stella's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, Stella. This is Dr. Chen. I hope you don't mind me texting. I got your number from your file. I wanted to check how you're feeling and make sure you're staying on top of your medications. How's your pain level today? The personal follow-up from her surgeon was completely unexpected. Stella had assumed that once she left the hospital, her care would be handed off to her primary physician for follow-up appointments. Much better today, thank you. Pain is manageable. I can't believe you're checking on me personally.
Of course I am. You're my patient, and I want to make sure your recovery goes smoothly. Plus, I remember what it's like to go through medical issues without family support. Sometimes a quick check-in can make all the difference. I really appreciate it. The hospital volunteer program connected me with someone wonderful who's been helping with everything I need. That's fantastic. Sarah Mitchell, right? She's one of our best volunteers. You're in excellent hands with her. They texted back and forth for a few more minutes, with Dr. Chen answering questions about activity restrictions and when Stella could return to work. The personal attention from someone who was undoubtedly managing dozens of other patients made Stella feel genuinely cared for in a way her family never had. As evening settled over Chicago, Stella reflected on the events of the past 48 hours. She had experienced more genuine care, practical support, and emotional connection from strangers and new acquaintances than she had from her biological family in years. The people who had shown up for her, Margaret, Dr. Chen, Mrs. Chen, Sarah, even Janet from work, had demonstrated what real family looked like through their actions rather than their words. Meanwhile, her actual relatives continued to offer empty expressions of love while consistently failing to provide any meaningful support when she needed it most. Their version of family was performative and conditional, based on convenience rather than commitment. For the first time in her adult life, Stella was beginning to understand that she deserved better than what her biological family had given her, and that real love wasn't about genetic connections, it was about people who chose to show up when it mattered. 3 days into her recovery, Stella woke up feeling significantly better. The sharp pain in her abdomen had faded to a dull ache, and she was moving around her apartment with much more ease. Sarah had stopped by the previous evening with homemade chicken soup and had reorganized Stella's medicine schedule into a simple chart that eliminated any confusion about timing and dosages. The improvement in her physical condition gave Stella mental space to process what had happened over the past few days. She found herself making lists, something she'd always done when trying to organize her thoughts. On one side of a notebook page, she wrote down every person who had shown up for her during this crisis. On the other side, she listed her family members and their respective responses. The contrast was staggering when laid out in black and white. On the showed up side, Margaret, the pre-op nurse who sat with her and provided comfort, Dr. Chen, who performed excellent surgery and followed up personally, Jessica, the recovery nurse who was gentle and thorough, Mrs. Chen, who brought food and offered ongoing support, Sarah, who materialized out of nowhere to handle all her practical needs, Janet, who finished her work project and sent a thoughtful card, Carlos, the Uber driver who wished her well, Jennifer from Patient Services who connected her with resources, even the hospital volunteers who had created a program specifically for people in her situation. On the family side, Patricia skipped surgery for book club wine night, Marcus chose a warehouse shift over supporting his sister, Rachel prioritized a dinner party over family crisis, Dad couldn't leave a poker game, and all of them had sent perfunctory texts days after the fact asking minimal questions and offering conditional help. The exercise was both illuminating and heartbreaking. Stella had spent years making excuses for her family's behavior, convincing herself that their indifference was normal, that she was asking too much by expecting them to prioritize her needs during genuine emergencies. But seeing the stark comparison on paper made it impossible to maintain those rationalizations. Around 10 a.m., her phone rang with another unknown number. Miss Foster, this is Detective Maria Santos with the Chicago Police Department. I'm calling about an incident report filed by Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Stella's blood went cold. I'm sorry, what kind of incident report? It's regarding potential elder abuse. A patient named Patricia Foster was brought to our emergency department yesterday evening claiming she was your mother. She was demanding access to your medical information and became increasingly agitated when staff couldn't locate you in the system. She eventually became verbally abusive toward hospital personnel and had to be escorted out by security. Stella sat down heavily in her kitchen chair. She is my mother, but I haven't spoken to her since before my surgery 3 days ago. I see. The hospital staff were confused because their records showed you had no family contact during your recent appendectomy, yet this woman was claiming you were missing and that the hospital was hiding information from her. When they explained patient privacy laws, she accused them of elder abuse and threatened to call the police herself. The absurdity of the situation was almost too much to process. Patricia Foster, who couldn't be bothered to interrupt her book club when her daughter was having emergency surgery, was now causing scenes at the hospital and claiming elder abuse because she couldn't access medical information she'd never asked about when it mattered. Detective Santos, my mother chose not to come to the hospital when I had surgery. She said her book club was more important. None of my family came. There was a pause on the other end. I'm sorry, did you say none of your family came to your surgery? That's correct. I went through emergency appendix surgery completely alone because they all had other commitments they considered more important. Detective Santos was quiet for several seconds. Miss Foster, I need to ask, are you being coerced or threatened by anyone to say that? Because your mother was quite insistent that something suspicious was happening. No, Detective. I'm telling you the truth. My family abandoned me during a medical emergency, and now apparently my mother is causing problems at the hospital because she wants access to information she never bothered to ask about directly. Would you be willing to speak with your mother to clarify the situation? She's been calling our department every few hours since last night, claiming we need to do a wellness check on you. Stella rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building. Detective, can I ask you something? In your experience, if someone was truly concerned about a family member's well-being, wouldn't they have tried calling that person directly before involving police? That would be the normal approach, yes. My mother hasn't called me once since I left the hospital. Not once. She sent a casual text message, and that's it. This isn't about concern for my welfare. This is about her need to control a narrative where she's the victim instead of the person who abandoned her daughter during surgery. Detective Santos seemed to understand the situation more clearly now.
Would you be willing to call your mother to confirm you're safe, just to close out this report? I'll call her, but I want to be clear. She's not a victim in this situation. She's someone who's trying to rewrite history to make herself look better. After hanging up with Detective Santos, Stella stared at her phone for several minutes before calling her mother. Patricia answered on the first ring. Stella, oh thank God, I've been so worried about you. The hospital said they couldn't find you, and I thought something terrible had happened. The performance was impressive in its audacity. Patricia was speaking as if she'd been frantically searching for a missing daughter, rather than someone who had ignored her child's emergency surgery. Mom, I was never missing. I had surgery 3 days ago, went home to recover, and have been in my apartment the entire time. The hospital couldn't give you information because of privacy laws, and because you never asked about me when I was actually there. What do you mean I never asked? Of course I asked. I called the hospital immediately when I heard. The lie was so blatant that Stella felt her patience snap entirely. Mom, you heard about my surgery from me. I called you directly while I was in the emergency room in excruciating pain, begging you to come to the hospital, and you told me your book club was more important. I never said that. You're remembering wrong. I would never choose a book club over my daughter's health. The gaslighting was textbook, denying something that had happened just days earlier, claiming Stella was misremembering, rewriting history to paint herself as a concerned mother rather than someone who had prioritized wine and gossip over her daughter's emergency surgery. Mom, I have the voicemail you left. I have the texts. I have documentation of exactly what happened. Well, I'm here now, aren't I? I'm trying to make sure you're okay. Why are you being so hostile towards someone who loves you? There it was, the classic manipulation technique. Patricia was repositioning herself as the victim of her daughter's hostility while completely ignoring her own behavior that had created the situation. You're not here, Mom. You're not at my apartment checking on me. You're not bringing me food or helping with my recovery. You went to the hospital trying to get information you could have gotten by simply calling me. And when they couldn't break privacy laws for you, you caused such a scene that security had to remove you and police got involved. I was worried. I didn't know how to reach you. You have my phone number. You've had it for years. You used it to send me a casual text asking how everything went, as if I had a dental cleaning instead of emergency surgery. The conversation continued in circles, with Patricia alternating between denial, victimization, and attempts to rewrite recent history. She insisted she'd been devastated to miss the surgery, but had been led to believe it wasn't serious. She claimed she'd been trying to respect Stella's independence by not coming to the hospital. Every excuse contradicted the previous one, but Patricia seemed genuinely convinced by her own revisionist narrative.
Finally, Stella ended the call with a simple statement. Mom, I need to focus on my recovery now. I'm safe, I'm being well cared for, and I don't need you to file police reports about my well-being when you haven't actually checked on my well-being yourself. After hanging up, Stella called Detective Santos back to confirm she was safe and to explain that her mother had a tendency toward dramatic reactions when she wasn't the center of attention. Understood, Miss Foster. We see this sometimes. Family members who create crisis situations to position themselves as heroes or victims. I'm glad you're recovering well and that you have good support systems in place. Support systems. That phrase perfectly captured what Stella had discovered over the past few days. Real support systems weren't based on obligation or guilt or genetic connection. They were based on people who chose to show up, who prioritized your needs when you were vulnerable, who offered help without conditions or expectations of gratitude. As if summoned by her thoughts, there was a knock at her door. Through the peephole, she could see Dr. Chen standing in the hallway, dressed in casual clothes rather than medical scrubs. I hope you don't mind me stopping by, Dr. Chen said when Stella opened the door. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to check on your incisions in person. Sometimes it's easier to assess healing when I can actually see the surgical sites. It was only later that Stella would realize Dr. Chen lived nowhere near Wicker Park and that this house call was entirely outside the scope of normal post-surgical care. At the moment, she was simply grateful for the personal attention from someone who had quite literally saved her life and continued to care about her recovery. Dr. Chen entered Stella's apartment with the easy familiarity of someone who had been there before, though this was actually her first visit. She carried a small medical bag and moved with the same confident precision Stella remembered from the operating room. "How has your pain been today?" Dr. Chen asked, setting her bag on the kitchen counter and washing her hands at the sink. "Much better, maybe a 3 out of 10 instead of the 7 it was yesterday." "Excellent, that's exactly the trajectory we want to see. Mind if I take a look at the incision sites?" As Dr. Chen examined the small laparoscopic incisions, Stella found herself studying the surgeon's face. There was something different about her demeanor today, less clinical, more personal. She seemed nervous in a way that had nothing to do with medical concerns. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Chen announced, stepping back. "No signs of infection, good healing response. You should be back to normal activities within another week or two." "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. The surgery, the follow-up calls, and now coming here personally, this goes way beyond normal doctor-patient care." Dr. Chen sat down heavily in one of Stella's kitchen chairs, as if the weight of something had suddenly hit her. "Stella, there's actually something I need to tell you. Something I should have mentioned before, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up." Stella felt a flutter of concern. "Is there a complication with the surgery? Something wrong that you didn't want to worry me about?" No, nothing like that. The surgery was textbook perfect. This is more personal." Dr. Chen took a deep breath. "When you were admitted to the hospital, I saw your name on the surgical schedule, Stella Foster. I almost couldn't believe it." "I don't understand." 28 years ago, when I was born, my birth mother's name was Patricia Foster. She was 17 years old, unmarried, and made the difficult decision to place me for adoption. I was adopted by wonderful people, the Chens, who gave me every opportunity in life, including the ability to become a doctor. The words seemed to hang in the air between them. Stella stared at Dr. Chen, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. "I've been searching for my birth family for years," Dr. Chen continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not because my adoptive family wasn't enough, they're amazing, but because I wanted to understand my medical history, maybe get some answers about where I came from. I hired a private investigator 2 years ago." Stella's mouth went dry. "What did you find?" "I found that Patricia Foster had 3 more children after placing me for adoption: Marcus Foster, Rachel Foster, and Stella Foster. When I saw your name on that surgical schedule, I thought it had to be a coincidence. Foster is a common name. But then I saw your age, your emergency contact information, and I knew." The room seemed to tilt around Stella. She gripped the arms of her chair, trying to steady herself against this impossible revelation. "You're saying you think you're my sister?" "I'm saying I know I am. I ran a DNA test using a sample from your surgical specimens. I know that sounds unethical, but I had to know for sure. The results came back yesterday. We share the same mother, Stella. We're half-sisters." The silence that followed was deafening. Stella found herself staring at Dr. Chen, at Amanda, trying to see family resemblance she'd been blind to before. Now that she was looking for it, she could see similarities around the eyes, the shape of their hands, even some of their mannerisms. "But that means," Stella started, then stopped as the full implications hit her. "It means that while our mother couldn't be bothered to show up for your surgery, your sister, who you didn't even know existed, was the one who saved your life in that operating room." The irony was so profound that Stella didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Her biological family had abandoned her in her moment of greatest need, while her unknown sister had literally held her life in her hands and guided her through the crisis. "Does she know?" Stella asked quietly. "Does Patricia know you've been looking for her?" Amanda shook her head. "I sent letters to her last known address about 6 months ago, but they were returned as undeliverable.
I wasn't sure how to approach the situation, especially after my investigator told me about her personality. What do you mean? He interviewed some former neighbors, looked into public records. Apparently, she has a pattern of creating drama, claiming to be a victim when she's actually the one causing problems. The investigator warned me that reuniting with her might not be the positive experience I was hoping for. Stella let out a bitter laugh. He was right about that. She actually called the police yesterday claiming I was missing, when really she just couldn't get my medical information from the hospital because she never bothered to ask me directly. I heard about that incident. The hospital staff were completely baffled by her behavior. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Stella found herself thinking about all the moments during her surgery and recovery when she'd felt so alone, never knowing that her sister, her actual sister, had been there the entire time, providing the most intimate care possible. Amanda, Stella said finally, testing out the name in a new context. That's your name, right? Amanda Chen? Amanda Lynn Chen, though apparently my birth name was supposed to be Amanda Foster. Why didn't you tell me before, during the surgery or when you were checking on me? Amanda ran her hands through her hair, a gesture that Stella now realized she herself did when stressed. I was terrified. What if you rejected me? What if you thought I was crazy or lying? What if you didn't want anything to do with me? I'd spent my whole life wondering about my birth family, and suddenly I was responsible for your medical care. It felt like too much to process while you were vulnerable and recovering. But you took extra care of me. The personal follow-up calls, coming here tonight, you were acting like family, even when I didn't know we were family. I couldn't help myself. The moment I realized who you were, I felt this overwhelming need to protect you, to make sure you were okay. When I saw that you were going through surgery alone, it broke my heart. I knew I couldn't reveal our connection right then, but I could make sure you got the best possible care. Stella thought about all the small kindnesses Amanda had shown her, the gentle bedside manner, the personal attention, the way she'd made time for extra explanations and reassurance. It had felt different from standard medical care, more invested and personal. Now she understood why. What happens now? That's entirely up to you. I don't want to force a relationship just because we share DNA. I know that blood relation doesn't automatically create family bonds. I learned that from my adoptive family, who chose to love me every day. But I'd like to get to know you, if you're open to it. I'd like that too. Though I have to warn you, our birth family is pretty dysfunctional. You might decide you're better off not knowing them. I've already decided that. From what I've observed and researched, Patricia Foster isn't someone I need in my life. But you're different. You were abandoned by people who should have supported you, but you're not bitter or manipulative. You're not trying to make yourself the victim or rewrite history to make yourself look better. Maybe because I had real consequences to face. When you go through a medical crisis alone, you can't pretend someone else is responsible for your situation. Amanda nodded. Exactly. You've had to develop genuine strength and independence, not just the performance of being strong. As the evening progressed, they began sharing stories about their lives. Amanda talked about her adoptive parents, both doctors who had encouraged her medical career while never making her feel obligated to follow in their footsteps. She described a childhood filled with support, encouragement, and unconditional love.
Stella found herself describing her own upbringing with new clarity, seeing patterns she'd never recognized before. The way Patricia had always positioned herself as the victim of her children's needs, how Marcus had learned to avoid responsibility by claiming other commitments, how Rachel had perfected the art of offering help she never intended to provide, how their father had mastered the skill of expressing love while consistently failing to show up when it mattered. "It sounds like you raised yourself," Amanda observed. "I guess I did, in a lot of ways. I learned early that I couldn't count on them for anything important. But you still kept trying. You still called them when you needed help. Old habits die hard, I suppose. Or maybe I kept hoping they'd eventually become the family I needed them to be." Amanda reached across the table and squeezed Stella's hand. "You don't have to hope for that anymore. You've got people who actually show up for you now. Sarah, Mrs. Chen, your coworker Janet,
And now you've got me too, if you want. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Stella felt like she truly had family. Not the obligatory kind based on shared genetics, but the chosen kind based on mutual care and commitment. The sister she'd never known existed had been there for her when it mattered most, had literally saved her life, and was now offering genuine relationship based on choice rather than obligation. It was the kind of family she'd always deserved but never known she could have. 6 weeks later, Stella stood in the kitchen of Amanda's Lincoln Square townhouse, helping prepare dinner for what had become their weekly tradition. The surgical scars had healed completely, leaving only faint marks that served as reminders of the night that changed everything. Amanda's adoptive parents, Dr. Robert and Dr. Helen Chen, had welcomed Stella into their family with the same unconditional warmth they'd shown Amanda for 28 years. Helen was teaching Stella how to make proper dumplings, while Robert regaled them with stories from his cardiology practice, treating Stella as if she'd been part of their family for decades rather than weeks. The trick is in the pleating, Helen explained patiently, demonstrating the technique for the third time. Too loose and they fall apart during cooking. Too tight and the filling has nowhere to expand. Stella's attempt looked more like a lumpy pouch than Helen's perfect crescent, but nobody criticized her technique. Instead, Robert made a joke about his own early dumpling disasters, and Amanda shared the story of her first attempt at cooking for her medical school roommates. This was what family dinners were supposed to feel like: warm, supportive, filled with laughter and genuine interest in each other's lives. It was such a stark contrast to the foster family gatherings Stella remembered from her childhood, where conversations had revolved around complaints, gossip, and Patricia positioning herself as the perpetual victim of various imagined slights. "Any word from the infamous Patricia?" Amanda asked, knowing the answer, but checking in on Stella's emotional well-being. "She called again yesterday. Same routine. She's the victim. I'm ungrateful. She doesn't understand why I'm being so hostile to someone who loves me." Stella had mastered the art of mimicking her mother's manipulative tone. "She's apparently telling people that I had a breakdown after surgery and am refusing to see family." Robert shook his head in disgust. Classic narcissistic behavior. Create a crisis, position yourself as the victim, then blame everyone else when people don't participate in your drama. "The good news is that I don't feel guilty about it anymore," Stella continued. "For weeks, I kept thinking maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I should give her another chance. But then I compare how she treated my medical emergency to how all of you have treated my recovery, and there's no comparison." Helen looked up from her dumpling preparation. "Stella, you know what I told Amanda when she was little. I said that love isn't something you say, it's something you do. Your mother can say she loves you all she wants, but her actions during your crisis told you everything you needed to know about the quality of that love." Amanda nodded in agreement. "That's actually something that helped me process being given up for adoption. My birth mother made a choice based on what was convenient for her at 17. My adoptive parents made choices every day for 28 years based on what was best for me. Which one sounds more like love?" The comparison wasn't lost on Stella. Patricia had made choices based on her own comfort and convenience her entire adult life, skipping her daughter's surgery for book club, prioritizing social activities over family crises, then rewriting history when those choices made her look bad. Meanwhile, the Chen family had spent decades making daily choices to support, encourage, and prioritize Amanda's well-being. "Speaking of choices," Amanda said with a mischievous grin, "I have something to tell you all. I submitted my application to join Doctors with Borders yesterday." The announcement brought immediate excitement from her parents and Stella. Amanda had been talking about international medical work for months, inspired by her experience treating patients who had no family support. She wanted to provide medical care to people in crisis situations around the world.
"Where would you be stationed?" Helen asked, beaming with pride. "Probably East Africa initially, working in refugee camps. It's a 2-year commitment, but I can come home for visits every 6 months." Stella felt a momentary pang at the thought of Amanda leaving, but it was immediately overshadowed by admiration for her sister's dedication to helping others. This was what real families did. They supported each other's dreams, even when it meant sacrifice or separation. I'm so proud of you, Stella said genuinely. You're going to save so many lives. Actually, Amanda said, her expression becoming more serious, meeting you, seeing how you handled the crisis alone, that's what convinced me to apply. You showed me how many people out there are going through the worst moments of their lives without any support system. I want to be there for people who have nobody else. The circle of impact was profound. Stella's abandonment by her biological family had led to Amanda recognizing her calling to help others in similar situations. Pain had been transformed into purpose. Isolation had become inspiration for connection. As they sat down to dinner, Robert raised his wine glass. I'd like to make a toast to Stella for surviving not just emergency surgery, but the realization that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally had conditions on everything. And to Amanda for choosing to turn that recognition into service to others. And to all of us for proving that the best families are the ones we choose to create together. They clinked glasses around the table, and Stella felt the warmth of belonging she'd searched for her entire life. This was what she'd been missing in all those foster family gatherings: genuine affection, mutual support, shared values, and the security of knowing that these people would show up for each other no matter what. After dinner, Amanda walked Stella out to her car. The November air was crisp, and Chicago's skyline sparkled in the distance. Before you go, Amanda said, pulling an envelope from her jacket pocket, I wanted to give you this. Inside was a photograph from the operating room on the night of Stella's surgery. Someone had taken a picture of the surgical team after the successful appendectomy. Amanda stood in the center, surrounded by Margaret, Jessica, Dr. Hawkins, and the other nurses who had cared for Stella that night. I asked the hospital photographer to take this, Amanda explained. I thought you should have a picture of your real family, the people who were actually there for you when it mattered most. Stella stared at the photo, overwhelmed by the symbolism. Here was visual proof of the people who had shown up for her during the scariest night of her life. While her biological relatives were enjoying their social activities, these medical professionals had worked together to save her life and provide emotional support through her crisis. There's something written on the back, Amanda added. Stella flipped the photo over to find a message in Amanda's handwriting. Family isn't about the blood you share. It's about the people who choose to bleed for you when you need them most. Thank you for helping me understand what love really looks like. Tears filled Stella's eyes as she processed the profound truth in those words. For 28 years, she'd believed that family meant tolerating people who consistently failed to support her because they happened to share her genetics. She'd accepted crumbs of affection and made excuses for neglect because she thought that was normal. But her experience with emergency surgery had shown her what real love looked like. It looked like Margaret sitting with her when she was scared. It looked like Amanda performing flawless surgery and following up personally to ensure her recovery. It looked like Sarah showing up with groceries and unconditional support. It looked like Mrs. Chen bringing soup and offering ongoing help. It looked like the Chen family welcoming her into their home and treating her as if she'd always belonged there. Amanda, Stella said, her voice thick with emotion, I need to ask you something. Do you ever wonder how different our lives would have been if Patricia had kept you, if we'd grown up together in the same dysfunctional family? Amanda considered the question seriously. Sometimes, but then I think about who I became because of my adoptive family, someone who learned that love is about daily choice and commitment, not genetic obligation. If I'd grown up with Patricia's influence, I might never have learned what healthy relationships look like. I might have accepted dysfunction as normal, just like Marcus and Rachel seem to have done. So you think it worked out the way it was supposed to be? I think everything led us to that operating room on the night when you needed family most, and I was able to be there for you in a way our birth family never could have been. Maybe that was the point of our whole story, for you to learn that you deserve better than what they gave you, and for me to learn that family is about showing up when people need you. As Stella drove home through the quiet Chicago streets, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 6 weeks.
She'd lost a dysfunctional birth family that had never truly supported her, but she'd gained chosen family members who demonstrated genuine love through their actions. She'd survived not just physical surgery, but emotional surgery that had removed toxic relationships and made room for healthy ones to grow.
Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Hey, heard you've been avoiding mom's calls. What's your problem?" For the first time in her adult life, Stella read a message from her biological family without feeling guilty, angry, or obligated to respond. She simply deleted the text and blocked the number. She had real family now, people who had earned the title through their behavior rather than demanding it through genetics. The people who had abandoned her during surgery would continue their patterns of dysfunction and manipulation, but they would do it without her participation. Stella Foster had finally learned the difference between the family you're born into and the family you deserve, and she was never going back to accepting less than genuine love again. As she pulled into her apartment building's parking lot, Stella realized that her emergency appendectomy had been more than just life-saving surgery. It had been the beginning of her real life, the life where she was valued, supported, and genuinely loved by people who chose to show up for her when it mattered most. The family she'd always needed had been there all along, waiting to be discovered in the most unexpected places. Back in her apartment, Stella found herself looking at the surgical photo again. Each face represented a choice someone had made to care for her during her most vulnerable moment. She thought about the ripple effects of that night, how Margaret's compassion had shown her what maternal care should look like, how Dr. Hawkins had treated her with more paternal concern than her own father ever had, how the entire medical team had functioned as the family unit she'd never experienced. She opened her laptop and began typing an email to Sarah Mitchell, her volunteer, who had become a genuine friend over the weeks of recovery. Sarah deserved to know how much her support had meant, how her daily check-ins and practical help had demonstrated the kind of consistent care that Stella had never received from blood relatives. "Dear Sarah," she wrote, "I wanted you to know that your kindness during my recovery taught me something profound about human nature. You showed up for a complete stranger with more reliability and genuine concern than people who have known me my entire life. You redefined what it means to be family." As she continued writing, Stella found herself thinking about Mrs. Chen across the hall, who had somehow intuited exactly what kind of support was needed without being asked. The elderly woman had become like a surrogate grandmother, offering wisdom and comfort with the perfect balance of care and respect for independence. Tomorrow, Stella planned to visit Mrs. Chen with homemade cookies, a small gesture, but one that represented her commitment to nurturing the relationships that have proven themselves authentic. She was learning to invest her emotional energy in people who reciprocate that investment, rather than constantly trying to earn love from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing it. Her phone displayed 17 missed calls from Patricia, but Stella felt nothing but peace about ignoring them. Each unanswered call represented a boundary maintained, a refusal to participate in drama designed to center Patricia's needs while dismissing everyone else's well-being. The guilt that had once accompanied such boundaries had evaporated completely, replaced by self-respect and clarity about what she deserved. She thought about Rachel, who had finally left a voicemail earlier that week. "Stella, I don't understand why you're being so dramatic about everything. We're family, we love you, and you're acting like we committed some terrible crime by not dropping everything for your little surgery. Call me back so we can resolve this like adults." The complete lack of accountability in Rachel's message would have devastated Stella 6 weeks ago. She would have questioned her own perceptions, wondered if she was being too sensitive, maybe even called back to apologize for expecting support during a medical emergency. But now, she recognized the manipulation tactics with crystal clarity, minimizing her surgery as little, repositioning her reasonable expectations as dramatic, demanding she take responsibility for fixing a relationship they had damaged through their own neglect. Marcus had tried a different approach, showing up at her workplace the previous Friday. Janet, her coworker, who had become fiercely protective, had intercepted him in the lobby and informed him that Stella was in meetings all day.
When he persisted, insisting that family emergencies took precedence over work commitments, Janet had pointed out the irony of him prioritizing family now when he hadn't done so during Stella's actual family emergency. The thing is, Janet had told Stella later, he seemed genuinely confused about why you weren't available to drop everything for his convenience, like he couldn't understand that actions have consequences, that you might not want to engage with someone who abandoned you during surgery. That observation had crystallized something important for Stella. Her biological family operated from a worldview where their needs were always paramount, where other people exist to serve their emotional and practical requirements, where accountability was something that happened to other people. They literally could not comprehend that their behavior might have damaged relationships beyond repair. But Stella had discovered an alternative way of existing in the world through her chosen family. The Chens approached relationships with reciprocity, accountability, and genuine concern for each other's well-being. Amanda had shown her what sibling love could look like when it wasn't poisoned by competition and resentment. Robert and Helen had demonstrated what parental figures could be when they prioritized their children's needs over their own egos. She opened another email, this one to Janet, thanking her for finishing the Morrison presentation and for protecting her from Marcus's workplace ambush. These acknowledgments felt important, recognizing and appreciating the people who had stepped up when she needed support.
The contrast with her biological family's behavior was stark, not just in the moment of crisis, but in the aftermath. While Patricia continued calling the police and creating public scenes, while Rachel sent guilt-inducing messages and Marcus showed up making demands, Stella's chosen family continued providing quiet, consistent support without expecting praise or recognition. Amanda texted regularly with medical questions and updates about her Doctors Without Borders application, but never made her own career decisions about Stella's emotional state. Sarah continued checking in weekly, but respected Stella's growing independence and didn't try to insert herself into every aspect of recovery. Mrs. Chen offered help when needed, but never made Stella feel obligated to accept assistance or guilty for not needing it constantly. This was the difference between healthy and unhealthy relationship dynamics. Healthy people supported others without creating dependence or expecting eternal gratitude, while unhealthy people either provided no support at all or used their minimal efforts as weapons for future manipulation. Stella realized she had become a case study in how crisis reveals character. Her medical emergency had functioned like a stress test, separating genuine relationships from performative ones. The people who had failed the test were revealing their true natures through their continued behavior. Patricia's victimization, Rachel's guilt-tripping, Marcus's demands for access without accountability. Meanwhile, the people who had passed the test continued demonstrating their authentic care through ongoing actions rather than dramatic gestures or demands for recognition. As she prepared for bed, Stella felt profound gratitude for the pain that had led to this clarity. Without the appendicitis, she might have spent decades more accepting substandard treatment from people who claimed to love her while consistently failing to demonstrate that love through their choices. Her surgery had saved more than her physical life. It had saved her from a lifetime of emotional dysfunction, of accepting crumbs and calling them feasts, of making excuses for people who didn't deserve her loyalty. The scar on her abdomen would fade with time, but the lesson she'd learned about her own worth would remain forever. She had finally discovered what it felt like to be truly loved, supported, and valued, and she would never again settle for anything less. In the quiet of her apartment, surrounded by cards from people who genuinely cared about her recovery, Stella Foster fell asleep knowing she was finally part of the family she had always deserved. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.